You know, the fundamental of the idea that the adult brain is set in stone is, you know, the common saying that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but in fact you can. The adult brain, again, you know, the ripe old age in their 40s, 50s, 60s, even beyond, can change its structure and function in a significant way.
Everyone I know who's getting older forgets things, makes jokes about having senior moments, but I think deep down inside, everyone is kind of concerned that they're headed down this path of losing their cognitive abilities. I think it's very clear that everyone doesn't lose their cognitive ability.
There's two factors that contribute here. One is genetics. Our family history is an important component. And the other is our environment. And those relationships between genes and environment dictate the degree of gray matter loss. And so you can influence one and not the other. You can influence your environment, you can stay active, you can exercise your brain just as you can exercise your body. These are enormously helpful in slowing down that degenerative loss that's part of normal aging.
With recent advances in technology and research, several key things that we thought were absolutely true about the brain are being challenged and proven wrong. For many years, conventional wisdom in the neurosciences has been that the brain is fixed in its physical and anatomical organization after an early stage of development that ends in childhood. But a growing crescendo of scientific studies now shows that the brain is not hardwired in childhood, and we are not doomed by our DNA. On the contrary, our brain is pliable, plastic, and changeable throughout our lifespan, regardless of our age or genetics. Can we train the brain in ways that correct or compensate for injuries or impairments? Can we change our brain in ways that contribute to its rejuvenation as we grow older? To what extent can the brain heal itself with our guidance? Join us on a journey across the frontiers of neuroscience, psychology, and neurology as we explore the immense power of the Brain Fitness Program. Neuroplasticity is the key to brain fitness. The brain is malleable. Throughout our entire lives, it can be physically and functionally changed, even improved upon by how we use it. Brain plasticity has been called one of the most extraordinary discoveries of the 20th century.
It's true throughout evolution that the plasticity of the brain, the ability of the brain to adapt to our environment, continues through life. That adaptation is an opportunity for us to continue to stimulate our brain and slow down the degenerative progression during aging.
But brain plasticity does not function in the same way throughout our entire lives. In infancy and early childhood, the brain goes through its critical period, a time of riotous plastic brain change. This is a special period of time when plasticity is taking place on a large scale.
Well, a critical period in brain development is a setup period. That's when the brain basically is initially organizing its activities, it's doing the initial sorting. It's basically setting up the machinery in the initial form that allows us to take off in learning. But in this early period, the brain actually can't control learning itself. And a marvelous thing happens across the early life of the child. Across this period, the brain actually learns itself how to establish control.
When our bodies sense something, a noise, a feeling, a sight, our sensory organs, such as our eyes and ears, translate it into electrical impulses that the brain can understand. These impulses travel through the brain by passing from one neuron, a brain cell, to another, like in a relay race. How the impulses travel, the neural route they follow, the speed with which they're passed along, and so on, can change. As a skill is developed, these neural routes become more pronounced, deeper, faster, and easier for the brain to follow, and they involve more neurons. At birth, the brain has a few inherited neural pathways.
Early in life, all of these main trunk lines are formed. It's a little bit like thinking of a map of the U.S., where you're born with the superhighways or the big roads. And then gradually, as you develop skills and abilities, you're filling in the little local roads and the streets, and ultimately the driveways and the little lanes and byways and riding paths and walking trails. Ultimately, if you wanted to figure out how to get to grandma's house, you got to have all of that detail. So the brain basically starts by, of course, creating a basic way in which it ships information around on the big highways. And what it's doing is refining its pathways so that ultimately it can get to more and more specific control, more and more specific behavior, more and more specific collaboration in its control. We think of using a spoon as a relatively trivial thing. It seems simple. We've all mastered it. But actually, it's not so simple. And actually, as a consequence of learning to use it, massive changes in the brain have to occur. I have this lever, this little lever. It has a little scoop on one end. And I have to learn how to control it, hold it first of all. And now I have to learn how to manipulate it in a way that could keep it upright. And I have to load it with food. Well, that food could be gloppy, could be watery, could be heavy, could be light. And if you think of the massive nature of changes that underlie a skill like that, think of all of the changes that have to occur when you master a repertoire of skills, like movements in general, or your ability to produce speech, or your ability to understand it, or your ability to type. And the brain continually changes as we learn. As we experience new things that we will remember, the brain revises itself. As we learn any new skill or ability, the brain actually specializes.
Primary changes during this time occur in the details of the brain's local wiring. The brain also undergoes massive amounts of physical changes in its wiring each time we acquire a new skill or ability. Another important physical dimension of change that happens in early life and that continues throughout life is neurogenesis.
It seems that really what happens is you're born with some number of neurons, and then you make more and more and more and more until you're at least a year old, maybe a little older. And then after that, your brain starts pruning off, maybe not killing off neurons, but killing off little branches of them that go off to form connections with other